Moving on to the cultural milieu, the setting of A Rose for Emily is a small town in the South after the Civil War. In the story, it mentions Jefferson, that Miss Emily was buried in that cemetery where both Union and Confederate soldiers were buried, and the sentence ends with the name of the town. But if you know anything about William Faulkner, you know that the majority of his short stories and novels were set in this fictional Yoknapatawpha County in Mississippi. He was born and raised in Mississippi, and that's where he lived for most of his life. We know that the story is set from the 1890s to the approximately 1930-31. The first reference to the year, I believe, is 1894, when it talks about how Colonel Sartoris made a law that Negro women had to wear an apron if they were on the street. And then he also then remits Miss Emily's taxes in that year. And then, of course, she lives a long time after that. But the story jumps around in time, which might make it a little bit difficult to follow the timeline. But that is a modernist technique. It's like kind of playing with time in the works of fiction that these modernist authors wrote in. And so it is important that she is a Grierson, because before and during the Civil War, the Grierson family would have been an important family in this community. So they had lots of land, they had many slaves to work the land, but of course after the war, when they could not own those slaves, they no doubt then lost their money, they lost their land, and so what they had left was their name. But in the South, that tradition of considering the upper class to be kind of an aristocracy, even though we had no royalty actually in the U.S., that name mattered almost as much as money. And so as long as you were descended from one of those important upper class families, then you could put on airs, be treated as special. And so we know that the people in Jefferson, were kind of envious. They were kind of resentful of Miss Emily, because even though she had no money, she still has that name. But while they call her Miss, which would be a title of respect, they wouldn't call a lower class woman Miss, they would just call her by her first name. It would also be negative because it shows that she is unmarried. And a young woman in the South at this point in time would want is to make a good marriage, have a family, have children, and to have a husband who could support her. So again, during this time, a young woman, no matter what their class, would be under the rule of her father, and then if you were again a middle upper class woman, you'd be handed off to your husband. And of course, Miss Emily does not have a husband, but she's still a lady, right? Because she has this standing of being a Grierson, and so she needs to be protected and taken care of at least minimally. And so we know it is only minimally. They don't make her pay her taxes, but she has very little. Also, we think about the Northerners who came to the South after the Civil War, and they were not thought of highly at all. They were, of course, called carpetbaggers in the years of Reconstruction, and they were still out years after that, were definitely outsiders, usually considered bad or evil in some way. But Homer seemed to be an exception because he knows how to make himself liked. However, he is definitely beneath her socially. So while they thought it was okay for Miss Emily to have somebody to go out with on Sunday afternoons, because she didn't have anybody, she was lonely, and the town felt sorry for her, when it seemed like they were getting serious, that was another story. That's when they wanted to call in, the minister to come talk to her. They wanted to write to the family members because it was just unacceptable for a Southern lady to be seriously involved or to marry a Yankee. And then again, we have the stereotypical black servant who is loyal to the end. Right? So that idea that Southerners wanted to promulgate, that even after the Emancipation Proclamation, after slaves were freed, they were still treated so kindly by their former masters that they wanted to stay with them. Of course, in all reality, he probably just did not have a lot of other options. So he stayed with what he knew, rather than to try something that he didn't know. The narrative point of view is really interesting in this story because it is first person plural. We read some stories first person singular. That telling the story from an I point of view is very common. It's less common to have the plural we. But from the very first sentence, we know that it is a we because it says, when Miss Emily Grierson died, our whole town went to her funeral. And then it should make us question, how do the narrators know what they know? Well, if you've ever lived in a small town, you know that people don't have a whole lot of entertainment, not a whole lot of things to do, especially, of course, in the time before there was radio, before there was television, before there was the internet, smartphones, etc. So what do? They are nosy. They pay attention to what their neighbors are doing. They gossip about them, whether it might be after church or in the post office, in the cafe, in the drugstore, wherever it might be. And so that's what's happening in this story. People are watching Miss Emily to see what she's going to do, and they talk about it with other people. And so what does this point of view achieve? Well, it makes Miss Emily kind of mysterious because even though we know what the townspeeper think and say about her, we don't know what she thinks. We don't know what she really thinks about Homer, what her motivations are, and we don't ever know, of course, what Homer thought about Miss Emily. So we have this mystery that is helped along by the point of view. And the effect on the readers, besides the mysteriousness, a little bit of the suspense, is that we're kept at a distance from Miss Emily. Right? We are separated from her, and we only see her through the eyes of the townspeople. And so what does the point of view tell readers about the townspeople? And the answer to that is, well, they care about, what Miss Emily does and to a certain extent, but they are not willing to get involved enough to actually, go up to her house and demand to know what's going on. And it also tells the reader that they are culpable in what happens with Miss Emily because they know things. And they know that she bought that poison. They say that she will kill herself. That's what they say the next day after she bought that poison. They know that there's a room that was closed up in the house and would need to be broken into. So it's really interesting that they would allow this to go on. And it seems to be maybe something a little deeper than just the fact that she was a Southern lady. And so you don't ever talk to a Southern lady directly about how her house stinks or whatever it might be. Then you've got this symbolism. The house, of course, is very important in this story because it symbolizes Miss Emily herself. On the, again, second page in the textbook, it talks about how the house was left lifting its stubborn and coquettish decay above the cotton wagons and the gasoline pumps, an eyesore among eyesores. And so just like Miss Emily, the house ages as we go along in the story. And so it is a representation of her. It's also a place of safety for her, but it is both a prison and a tomb. She can't leave because somebody could come in and find the dead body of Homer there and know that she was a murderer. And it's also a tomb because it's like being dead, to be closed up in that old house with things molding and decaying and no money to fix anything up, no hope for a better future. And in fact, Miss Emily is driven mad, buried alive in the concept of Southern womanhood. She is so limited by the fact that she needs to find a husband, and when she thinks she's found one in Homer Barron and he rejects her, she feels like she can't let him go and has to kill him, and then is trapped, right, for the rest of her life there. So that the culture has formed her and made her into the kind of perverted person that she becomes. There's also foreshadowing that's used throughout the story. I'm sure you picked up on that. We're not totally surprised by the ending, except for the gray hair. It's because we know there's that nasty smell coming out of her house. We saw her where when her father died, she would not admit to it. It was only on the third day that she would let people into the house. Buying arsenic, and she goes to the drugstore, and we know she has to use that for something. She's not telling what it's for. We can guess. And Homer is never seen again after that last time he enters the house, but we do see Miss Emily's appearance, changing, where she gets fat and her hair turns gray. And of course, again, that gray hair is found. The themes in this story, well, there is a big danger of idolizing the past, looking back instead of forward. And while Faulkner wants to point this out to people in 1931, where it's not beneficial to people to look back at the Confederate South, where people feel like in the South that was the greatest time period of their history, because it wasn't a great time period, actually, because they were making their money off of enslaving people and treating them horribly. So just like today, when people are upset and tearing down those statues, it's because to idolize that is not it's not a way for people to be healthy and to make progress into the future. Then, of course, Miss Emily herself. There's the negative effects of being unable to change, denying change. In everybody's life, one of the only things that you can count on are that things are going to change. And so if you can't accept those changes, if you can't adapt to those changes, then you are stifled as an individual. You cannot grow and be productive in your own life. So this is what happened to Miss Emily. It's not a good thing to happen to anybody. And finally, the power of society on an individual. As already mentioned, the town helped to create a murderer and a necrophiliac, because what society values and says that people need to be like, how they need to think, how they need to look, how they need to act, that exerts a powerful force. We're so proud of people being individuals, but in fact we're always forcing for people to be a part of a group and to conform to those rules that we put in place. The archetypes in this story, ending up here, well, Emily definitely breaks societal taboos against murder and necrophilia. However, if she ever wanted any kind of forgiveness, we don't know about it. It seems that that is not her personality type. And then it seems like she is a vampire in reverse, feeding off the dead. Right? So she gets fat as the years go by because she seems to be feeding off of that dead body of Homer there in their bridal chamber that never actually was.